Tuesday, May 29th, 1453. The sun rises over the city of Constantinople for what would be the last time. The mighty walls that had withstood 1,000 years of war are crumbling. The streets, once filled with the proud citizens of the Byzantine Empire, are now drowning in chaos and bloodshed. Inside the imperial palace, the last emperor Constantine VI Palaiologos dons his armor for the final battle. He knows there is no escape. The once great empire that traced its origins to Rome itself is breathing its last. But how did it come to this? How did the Byzantine Empire, once the most powerful civilization in the world, descend into ruin? Was it the relentless invasions, the endless civil wars, the betrayal of its allies, or was its fall inevitable from the very moment it was born? This is the story of the Byzantine Empire, its glory, its corruption, and its catastrophic downfall. And to truly understand why it collapsed, we have to go back to where it all began. The Byzantine Empire rose from the ashes of Rome, inheriting its legacy and transforming it into something unique. From its foundation by Constantine the Great to the establishment of Constantinople, it was a beacon of civilization and power. But as with all great empires, its story is one of both triumph and tragedy. To understand how the Byzantine Empire met its end, we first have to go back to how it all began, not in the East, but in Rome itself. In the late 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was falling apart. Corruption ran deep, the economy was crumbling, and Rome's borders were under constant attack. Barbarian invasions, civil wars, and political assassinations had turned the empire into a fragile, chaotic mess. Then came Emperor Diocletian, a ruthless reformer who realized that Rome had grown too big to rule. In 285 AD, he made a decision that would change history forever. He split the empire in two. The Western Roman Empire, with Rome as its capital, would continue as the original empire, but the Eastern Roman Empire, with its new capital in the wealthy city of Byzantium, would be ruled separately. At first, the plan seemed to work. The eastern half, rich from trade and protected by geography, remained stable. Meanwhile, the West continued its slow collapse. But everything changed with Constantine the Great. In 324 AD, Constantine defeated his rivals and became the sole emperor of Rome. And then he did something unthinkable. He abandoned Rome. Instead of ruling from the city that had stood for centuries, Constantine moved his capital to Byzantium and renamed it Constantinople. In one swift move, he shifted the heart of the empire from west to east, setting the stage for the Byzantine Empire. By 395 AD, the split became permanent. The Western Roman Empire, weak and vulnerable, was overrun by barbarian tribes. Rome itself was sacked, and in 476 AD, the empire collapsed completely. But in the east, the empire survived, thrived even. With its new capital in Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire stood strong while its Western counterpart crumbled into dust. It was richer, more powerful, and better defended. The world had just witnessed the death of one empire and the birth of another. But the question remained, was Byzantium truly a new empire, or was it just Rome by another name? And if it was the true heir to Rome, did that mean it was doomed to suffer the same fate? Those questions would haunt the Byzantine Empire for the next 1,000 years. By the time the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, most historians assumed the Eastern Roman Empire would soon follow. After all, it had inherited the same problems: barbarian invasions, political corruption, and internal power struggles. But against all odds, it didn't just survive. it became one of the most powerful empires in history. At the heart of this transformation was the city of Constantinople. Unlike Rome, which had crumbled under constant sieges, Constantinople was nearly impossible to conquer. It sat between Europe and Asia, controlling vital trade routes and securing a never-ending flow of wealth. 3 massive walls, a powerful navy, and a population that refused to surrender made it a fortress like no other. But the real turning point came with one man, Justinian the Great. In 527 AD, Justinian ascended the throne with one impossible goal: to rebuild the Roman Empire. At this point, the West was nothing more than a scattering of fallen cities and warlords. But Justinian believed that Rome wasn't dead, it had just moved east. He unleashed one of the most ambitious military campaigns in history, led by his brilliant general Belisarius. Over the next 2 decades, the Byzantines conquered North Africa, reclaimed Italy, and even took back Rome itself. It seemed like the empire was reborn. But Justinian's vision came at a devastating cost. His wars drained the treasury, his people suffered under brutal taxes, and the empire was constantly on the brink of rebellion. When a plague swept through Constantinople in 541 AD, killing nearly half the population, his dream of restoring Rome died with it. The Byzantines had expanded too fast, spent too much, and weakened themselves in the process. The moment Justinian was gone, the empire began losing everything it had just reclaimed. The dream of a restored Rome had failed. But while Justinian's conquests had collapsed, his legacy would define Byzantium for centuries. He left behind the Hagia Sophia, one of the most breathtaking churches ever built. He also created the Justinian Code, a legal system that would influence laws across Europe for the next 1,500 years. Most importantly, he left behind an empire that refused to die. Byzantium had suffered wars, plagues, rebellions, and near financial ruin. It should have collapsed like the West, but somehow it didn't. And as history would prove again and again, the Byzantine Empire was a survivor, even when the odds were stacked against it. But how long could it last, and who would be the next threat to bring it to the edge of destruction? It wouldn't take long to find out. By the start of the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire had already faced war, plague, and economic disaster. And yet it still stood. But now it would face a new enemy, one that would change the empire forever. That enemy came from the deserts of Arabia. In 610 AD, while the Byzantine Empire was locked in a brutal war with its old rival, the Sasanian Persian Empire, something unexpected was happening in the city of Mecca. A man named Muhammad had begun preaching a new faith, Islam. That enemy came from the deserts of Arabia. In 610 AD, while the Byzantine Empire was locked in a brutal war with its old rival, the Sasanian Persian Empire, something unexpected was happening in the city of Mecca. A man named Muhammad had begun preaching a new faith, Islam. At first, the Byzantines barely noticed. Their focus was on Persia as both superpowers fought over control of Syria, Egypt, and the Holy Land. This war between Byzantium and Persia was one of the bloodiest in history, lasting nearly 30 years. Cities were burned, armies were wiped out, entire regions were devastated. And just when it seemed like Byzantium had won, reclaiming Jerusalem and pushing the Persians back in 628 AD, the empire was left exhausted and defenseless. Then came the Arab conquests. After Muhammad's death in 632 AD, his followers launched a lightning-fast military expansion that stunned the world. At first, the Byzantines barely noticed. Their focus was on Persia, as both superpowers fought over control of Syria, Egypt, and the Holy Land. This war between Byzantium and Persia was one of the bloodiest in history, lasting nearly 30 years. Cities were burned, armies were wiped out, entire regions were devastated. And just when it seemed like Byzantium had won, reclaiming Jerusalem and pushing the Persians back in 628 AD, the empire was left exhausted and defenseless. Then came the Arab conquests. After Muhammad's death in 632 AD, his followers launched a lightning-fast military expansion that stunned the world. Within just a few decades, the Islamic caliphates had obliterated the Sasanian Empire and turned their attention to Byzantium. The Arabs took Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa, regions that had been part of the empire for centuries. The Byzantine army, weakened from its war with Persia, stood no chance. And then in 674 AD, they besieged Constantinople itself. For the first time, the empire's mighty walls were put to the test. But just when it seemed like the city might fall, the Byzantines unleashed their secret weapon, Greek fire. This was a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. A fiery liquid that burned on water, capable of destroying entire fleets. With it, the Byzantine navy turned the tide, forcing the Arabs to retreat. The empire had survived again, but it had changed forever. Byzantium was no longer the great power it had once been. The empire's Latin-speaking Roman roots had faded. It was now a Greek empire, an Orthodox Christian empire, and an empire that had lost some of its most valuable lands. And yet Constantinople still stood. But how much longer could it hold out? Because as powerful as the Arabs were, they wouldn't be the last enemy to come knocking at the empire's gates. A new wave of invaders was coming, and they would shake Byzantium to its core. The Byzantine Empire, against all odds, began to reclaim its lost territories. Through strategic military campaigns and shrewd diplomacy, it managed to strike back at its enemies. This period marked a resurgence, a testament to the resilience and determination of the Byzantines. By the 8th century, the Byzantine Empire had suffered near total collapse. It had lost Egypt, Syria, and the Holy Land to the Islamic caliphates. Its economy had been crippled. The empire itself had been reduced to just Anatolia, the Balkans, and Constantinople. Many believed that Byzantium was simply waiting for its inevitable fall, but then it fought back. The turning point came with Emperor Leo III, who ascended the throne in 717 AD, and his first challenge, a second, even more massive Arab siege of Constantinople. This time, the Umayyad Caliphate launched a full-scale invasion, bringing an army of over 100,000 men and an armada of warships to finally wipe Byzantium off the map. The odds were impossible. The empire had a fraction of that number, but Constantinople was no ordinary city. For one full year, the Byzantines held the walls, launching surprise counterattacks and devastating enemy fleets with Greek fire. Then, in a shocking turn of fate, the Arab forces were struck by famine, disease, and a brutal winter. As supplies ran out, their navy was crushed in battle, and the survivors fled. Against all odds, the empire had survived again. But Leo III wasn't just a warrior emperor, he was a reformer. After saving the empire, he focused on rebuilding it from within. He reorganized the army, strengthened the economy, and most controversially, he launched the iconoclasm movement. This decision would divide the empire for over a century. Leo III and his successors believed that the veneration of religious icons, paintings of Jesus, Mary, and the saints, had led to Byzantium's downfall. They saw it as idolatry and ordered that icons be destroyed. This enraged many Byzantine Christians, especially in the West, where the Pope in Rome openly opposed the policy. The result? A deep split between the Byzantine Church and the Western Church. Tensions between the Pope and the Byzantine Emperor grew worse, and in 800 AD the Pope made a decision that would change history. He crowned Charlemagne as the Roman Emperor of the new Holy Roman Empire. To the Byzantines, this was a direct insult. They saw themselves as the only true successors of Rome, and now the Pope was giving that title to a barbarian Frankish king. The East and West were drifting further apart. And yet, despite these internal conflicts, the empire was regaining its strength. Under the Macedonian dynasty from 867 to 1056 AD, Byzantium reached its peak once again. It expanded its borders, reclaiming lost territories from the Arabs and defeating the powerful Bulgarian Empire, turning Byzantium into the dominant power of Eastern Europe. Its wealth grew, Constantinople flourished, and Byzantine culture influenced Russia, the Balkans, and beyond. For the first time in centuries, it looked like the empire was back in control. But lurking in the shadows was a new enemy, one that would shake the very foundations of Byzantium. And when they arrived, the empire's greatest strength, Constantinople itself, would prove to be its greatest weakness. But as history has shown, no empire is eternal. The once mighty walls of Constantinople, which had withstood countless sieges, were now facing a threat unlike any before. The Ottomans, with their advanced weaponry and unyielding determination, set their sights on the heart of Byzantium.
We will defend our city to the last breath. This is our home, our legacy, and we will not surrender.
Despite the emperor's valiant efforts, the siege was relentless. Day by day, the defenses crumbled and hope dwindled. On May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. The city, once a beacon of civilization, was now under Ottoman control.
The fall of Constantinople was not just the end of an empire, it was the end of an era. The echoes of Byzantium's legacy, however, would continue to resonate through history, influencing cultures, politics, and religions for centuries to come.
And so, the story of Byzantium, a tale of resilience, ambition, and transformation, came to a close. But its spirit, its achievements, and its lessons live on, reminding us of the impermanence of power and the enduring nature of human endeavor. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire had survived the impossible. It had fought off barbarians, Persians, Arabs, Bulgarians, Crusaders, and Mongols. It had endured plagues, civil wars, religious schisms, and betrayals. It had been besieged, sacked, and nearly wiped off the map, and yet it still stood. But in the 15th century, its time was finally running out. Byzantium was no longer the empire it once was. Its borders had shrunk to a fraction of their former size. The once great imperial army was a shadow of its former strength. Most of its cities had fallen. And worst of all, a new power had risen to take its place: the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans were unlike any enemy the Byzantines had faced before. They were organized, disciplined, and ruthless. Under Sultan Mehmed II, they were determined to do what no army had ever done: take Constantinople, the last remnant of the Roman world. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. For 53 days, the Ottoman army, over 80,000 strong, surrounded Constantinople, bombarding its ancient walls with massive cannons. The Byzantines, led by Emperor Constantine III Palaiologos, fought with everything they had, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. And then, on May 29, 1453, the walls were finally breached. The Ottomans flooded the city, cutting down anyone in their path. Constantine II, the last emperor of Byzantium, refused to flee. He tore off his imperial regalia, grabbed his sword, and charged into the battle, never to be seen again. By midday, it was over. The great city of Constantinople had fallen. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of Rome, was gone. For the Ottomans, it was the beginning of a new age. For the world, it was the end of an empire that had once ruled over half the known world. But even in its final moments, Byzantium never truly died. Its culture, its art, and its knowledge lived on, carried by the scholars who fled west, helping spark the Renaissance. Its religion spread to Russia, shaping Orthodox Christianity for centuries to come. And its spirit remained, an empire that had fought until its very last breath. It had defied fate for 1,000 years, but in the end, the inevitable had caught up with it. The Roman Empire had finally fallen, and this time there was no coming back. If you found this deep dive into the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible history breakdowns. Want to know why the Roman Empire truly collapsed, or how the Ottomans built their empire on the ashes of Byzantium? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next